Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Black Parenting Series, Enriching 2SLGBTQIA plus youth in the family. We have a short time together today, and so I just want to go over our agenda for that time. We'll do a land acknowledgement, some introductions, as well as have some presentations from our amazing guest speakers, Andre, Dwight, and Chloe, and then we'll do a wrap up. Let's begin. Land acknowledgement. One of the most, or rather, yeah, one of the most impactful statement I've heard about a land acknowledgement is that they're not canned statements, meaning that, it may be in the past having a blurb and kind of reading that blurb was necessary to bring awareness to the importance of a land acknowledgement, but now that has to evolve a little bit more to including more of a personal statement. And so when I think of a land acknowledgement, I of course immediately think, for example, that I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nations, but I also think of my personal relationship with the lands that I called home or have called home. And so I invite folks, to take some time, and we'll take maybe a minute to reflect on the lands that you've called home, maybe the peoples that have lived on those lands, and think about maybe a value that has informed your existence on that land. So let's maybe take just a minute to do that really quickly. So I know for myself, one of the values that I think about is just how calming and soothing being amongst trees and the waterfront in Pickering here is. And it reminds me of the land that I called home, Jamaica, which is, very filled with trees and water and that opportunity to have sun. And so when I think of acknowledging land and my love for land, those are the images that immediately come to mind. And so I don't know if Andre or Chloe, this kind of like exercise has called you to maybe reflect on something that you might want to share.
Pretty similar sentiments. Like I'm a Pisces, so I love water and just nature overall. So just water is a calming force to me. So it helps me think. It just reinvigorates me, and it we have so many beautiful places in Canada that we call home. And it just makes me reflect on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. For me, I think I've been feeling really connected to this concept of the wind and how we've always had the same winds. The air doesn't just leave. And so potentially it's the same winds that have been circling the globe. It's possible that the same breeze we felt, our ancestors felt. And I thought that was always a very cool and less recognized unifier of people and of the times, how we kind of have this ancient wind going on. And I feel very very connected to the ephemery, the kind of moving around. I'm an air sign, so I also feel very much connected to that concept of being within and without and all around.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, both of you. Yeah, and so continue to just like nurture that connection, I think is so important, especially as we uh, continue to forge connection with the folks who have called this land their home for millennia. Yeah. Okay. So let's do some introductions. I've already, referred to you both by name, Andre and Chloe, but let's do some introductions here. Andre Dwight is a single Black gay dad of twins residing in London, Ontario. In the fall of 2017, Andre embarked on his journey to become a single dad via surrogacy with the help of an egg donor and a surrogate. His twins were born in the summer of 2018, to which he documented his journey on his YouTube channel, Single Black Gay Dad TV. Andre is a supporter of Black Lives Matter, women's rights, and LGBTQ rights. Those matters are very close to his heart. And so I'm so happy to have you today, Andre. Thank you so much. I'll also go ahead and do an introduction of Chloe. So Chloe is a Black and queer holistic health and consent educator and Reiki practitioner who does her work as the Ray Queer. I love that. Her focus is on the intensity of the human experience and the ways in which we can integrate empathy and radical honesty with the challenging parts of our lives while we learn and unlearn together. Chloe serves as a conduit to hold space for and witness the magic that exists within our many communities. So happy to have you here as well, Chloe. And I'm really looking forward to just like the conversations and insights that you're both going to share in this workshop. Myself, my name is Chris, pronouns he, they. I'm an intern with I4ADA Institute, also member of the community. So happy to just learn and hear these insights and just share together. So with that said, let's get into the first presentation, which is Andre. I'll stop sharing here so that you can have full sharing ability.
Okay, so for my presentation, I wanted to discuss the topic of providing support to my LGBTQ plus child. So during this presentation, I'll be going over what does support look like, how to support your child, utilizing the appropriate pronouns, how to navigate your feelings, because those are very important, why you should support your LGBTQ plus child, and how to move on once you've begun the process of discovery and accepting of your child. What does support look like? Support looks like unconditional love. This is love without conditions and allowing your child the space to be who they are and being accepting of that. I know that it is a bit hard when we have an idea of what our children and what we want them to be. And when they present themselves as who they are, that is where our love encompasses everything else and allows us to love them for who they are exactly without conditions and allowing them to be free to be who they are. Support also looks like not kicking your child out. A lot of LGBTQ plus youth experience homelessness as a result of not being able to stay at their residence because of their preferences or lifestyles, as others like to refer to it as. So providing the safety net and allowing your child the ability to experiment and be who they are and discover themselves, self-discovery, while providing them with a safe space that allows them to continue to grow and thrive under the roof that they've called home for so long. Support also looks like listening, because listening is very important. Every child's needs are different, and each two children are not the same, nor will they require the same things from you. So support for each person looks different. For some people, they require you to listen more or provide more feedback or provide more love, care, different things like that. So it's important to listen to your child to know what they require. And also being able to understand, because understanding is very important too, and it comes along with listening. When you are listening to understand what someone's saying, you're a lot able to be understanding of their needs. And when you are understanding their needs, it provides a lot more support to that child, especially when they need it most. Support also looks like utilizing the appropriate pronouns, especially in the LGBTQ plus community. There are various different pronouns that are appropriate to each person. So it's very important that we ask each other's pronouns and make sure we make our best effort to use the appropriate ones. I know that it is a touchy and hard subject for some, especially some who were raised before this time where things are shifting and changing. So you do need to give yourself a little grace and a little understanding and patience as you navigate to these new things that you haven't been accustomed to. But it is important to try to make every effort to utilize the appropriate pronouns for your child, because it does make things a lot easier for you and them. It helps build trust. And it's respect to refer to someone as they would like to be referred to as. Support also looks like defending and advocating for your child. So that means outside forces, when it comes to school, when it comes to family, when it comes to friends, just letting your child know that you have their back, and that you will always have their best interests at heart, and advocate for them where necessary, whether it's regarding medication, access to anything regarding trans or any services that may be required. You need to be able to advocate for your child if they need therapy, different things like that, always putting their best interests at heart and making sure that that you defend them and they know that you have their back. The most important is obviously creating a safe space. LGBTQ teens have the highest rate of suicide amongst their peers. And I did find some additional data from the Trevor Project that I wanted to share also. 45% of LGBTQ plus youth have seriously attempted and considered suicide in the past year. So when we do talk about support of LGBTQ plus teens, it's imperative. It's literally life and death for some. So that's a very important point as to why creating a safe space at home is very important, especially in a world that is not always very accepting. We need to make sure that the home is the safe place, and they know that no matter what's going on, they can always come to their parents and discuss those things. Additional stats: LGBTQ plus youth who felt high social support from their family reported attempting suicide less than half the rate of those who had moderate social support. So again, if they have that support at home and they know that even though things in the world may not be easy, knowing that they can come home to mom and dad and be able to discuss anything that's going on and know that their mother and father will have their back, that is something that creates that shell and protects your child and allows them to not have the higher rates that other areas of the community are seeing. So basically, support is the most important thing when it comes to this particular group, and making sure that we continue to provide them with a safe space. The last point that I wanted to provide for what support looks like is not weaponizing religion. A lot of the LGBTQ plus youth that come from Caribbean families, by nature, a lot of us are very spiritual and come from a religious background. So a lot of the religious teachings are against the LGBTQ plus lifestyle, as some would refer to it as. So support looks like allowing your child the freedom to be who they are and not utilizing your religion in order to weaponize your stance on that. Just allowing them the freedom to be who they are and not threatening them with religious fallback if they don't adhere to those rules in that particular religion. How to support your child. So again, listening and discussion is very important. Listening, having those open dialogue and those discussions, they're not always easy, but it will help both of you in building your bond with discussing what their particular needs are, what support looks like for them, and being willing and open to meet in the middle and find some common ground when it comes to your relationship. Again, asking your child what support is needed, which is very important, because again, it looks different for each person, and support for me is not going to be what you would consider support. So it's very important to ask what is needed. Support also looks like providing resources, including therapy if needed. A lot of LGBTQ plus youth can benefit from therapy and different things like that, because again, a lot of them are finding themselves. They're growing up in a world that hasn't always been supportive. A lot of them don't have many people that look and sound like them, so they don't know how to navigate certain issues that they are having. And being able to talk to a therapist or someone who's qualified in that realm may be of some assistance to them, so that if that is necessary and you are noticing things in your child, including depression and things like that, it's best to obviously to loop in a doctor and see what resources are available and what is appropriate for that child. Also encouraging gender expression, because gender expression looks different for each child. And especially in the self-discovery stage where we're trying to find out who we are, and certain things work for us and others things don't. So we do find a lot of experimenting with makeup and hair dye and certain outfits and things like that. It's not always easy to find yourself, even as a child who's not a part of the LGBTQ plus community. So it's good to encourage them to be who they are and be willing to allow them to express themselves in the way that they deem to be necessary. In addition to that, you support your child by also respecting their right to privacy. I know that in the Caribbean community, they don't always believe in that, but it is very important, especially as they navigate through the world and figure out who they are. And when you build that bond with them and you are listening and they know that they can trust you, they will come to you and share their inner darkest secrets with you, and then you can continue to build on your bond and provide them with that safe space where they can continue to be honest with you, and you both will learn to trust each other as time goes by and be able to navigate your relationship in that way. Utilizing the appropriate pronouns. So when doing my research for this section, I learned something new. I was only aware of the she, he, and they pronouns. Apparently, there's a lot more. So I wanted to share a different one with you also, which is subjective. It's called Z. The objectives for that are here and zir. Possessive is here's and zirs. Herself and zirself. So again, gender expression and pronouns differ by the person, so it's best, rather than to assume, to ask how that person would like to be referred to as, and make your best effort to adhere to those, because of course, if you are misgendering someone and not using the appropriate pronouns, it does come across as disrespect, and it will dampen the relationship. So it's best to try and find common ground and figure out what they would like to be referred to as, he, she, they, or zir, or any of the other additional gender pronouns, and making sure that you adhere to that. I know it is hard. We grew up in a world where it was he and she for the longest time. So even as myself, I'm still learning and growing as a gay male. And these are things that are new to me. So don't be hard on yourself if you don't understand and this is out of left field, because it is for many of us. And just giving yourself grace and patience to grow as a person and be open-minded and be open to the changes and the direction that the world is moving in. How to navigate your feelings. Because I don't think this is something that we all talk about. We talk about support and being there for others, but we all often forget about ourselves, which is a very important part of the discussion, because your feelings are valid and they do matter, and you need to have patience and grace for yourself. It is common to feel disappointed, to feel feelings of guilt. You may possibly feel anger. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, as a parent, we have ideas for our children, the dreams and hopes that we want them to be. And sometimes it doesn't always turn out that way. And it doesn't mean that they're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're a failure or you failed as a parent. It just means that your child is expressing themselves in a different way. And it hasn't changed anything. It just changes the feelings that you thought of the feelings of what you thought they would have been. They're still the same child. They're still the same loving child. They may not be in the way that you thought they would have turned out. But it is, your feelings are valid. And especially when it comes to possibly having a trans child, you may have thought you had a boy, and then your child may be transitioning to a woman. And that may be hard. It might feel to you as a parent, it might feel like you're losing that child that you thought you had. And that is valid. You have to live in that and be accepting of those feelings, because they are real and they are genuine, and you are entitled to feel those things. And it's important to be aware of that, as well as be open to the changes and be willing to discuss those feelings and let your child know, like, I will love you unconditionally. I feel this way. And just being honest about your feelings, because they are there and they don't disappear just because you're supporting someone. Also, to navigate your feelings, it's important to use the appropriate word usage. So that is to avoid derogatory terms, which a lot of us LGBTQ plus youth have been subjected to throughout the years. And those things are hurtful, and they do stay with you. And when those things are used, they're hard to take back. And once you have gone somewhere when it comes to words, it's very hard to take back, and very hard to build and maintain a relationship when certain things are used. So just making sure that you use the appropriate words, and if you're unsure if something's offensive or derogatory, best to ask or not use it if when in doubt. Again, having patience for your process, because it does take long to navigate your feelings, especially when you've had a child for so long and you thought you knew everything about them, and then changes start to occur and it becomes out of left field, and it feels like, who is this person, as they discover themselves and go through self-discovery. So just having the patience for yourself to allow that process to take place will be in your best interest. And again, extending the grace and understanding to yourself, because we all talk about forgiveness for others, and it's very easy to forgive each other, like each other and other people, but also not always easy to forgive yourself. So learning how to navigate that and allowing yourself the patience and grace, and just understanding that you are a human being and your feelings are valid, and letting that take place will be better for you in the long run. Why should I support my LGBTQ plus child? Again, it strengthens your bond between the two of you. Once you're providing the support that they need, they will always be able to come to you and be able to trust each other and build that bond in the world, and in your home, in your safe space. Providing that safe space to protect your child, because again, the world is not the friendliest place when it comes to LGBTQ plus youth. So making sure that they know that they can always come home and they can always talk to mom or dad about any issues that they are having is always going to be in their best interest as well as yours. And as we mentioned earlier with the LGBTQ plus youth and the higher rate of suicide, so providing that support could literally be life or death when it comes to your child. And we all don't want to live with regrets. And we want to make sure that our children grow up to be strong, healthy members of society that are going to be impactful and make an impact in this world. So we want to make sure that we are providing the safe space and letting that child have the freedom to grow and be who they are. Again, unconditional love and support is important with parenting overall, but definitely there's an emphasis when it comes particular to this group, because additional support is usually needed based on the things that happen in the world, including bullying, discrimination. So you want to make sure that you are always there to advocate for your child and letting them know that no matter what's happening, they can always come home and you will always love them unconditionally. How to move forward once we've navigated everything that we're going through in terms of providing support. So once we go through that, we have those discussions and we know what support for that child looks like. Just continuing transparency, being honest about your feelings, being open to listening to your child's feelings, and just being willing to be transparent about everything, the good, bad, and the ugly. It's not always pretty. when we discuss how we feel, but it is important because both parties need to find some common ground and be able to be transparent about their feelings. Also, again, having open dialogue and continuing to listen, because that will change and expand as that child continues to grow. The support they require at 16 is not the support that they will require at 24 and onwards. So we want to make sure that we are providing that open dialogue and continue to listen as things evolve in that relationship. Continue to build and maintain trust between the two of you, because that will make the world of difference when things are hard, when they have uncomfortable discussions that they need to have. They'll be able to have those with you if you've built a proven track record of them being able to trust you, knowing that you'll continue to advocate for them and always have their best interests at heart when it comes to advice and support. And forgiveness if necessary, because sometimes derogatory things are said. Children don't always feel support when they do come out or require that level of support. And it's important to be able to navigate, be honest about your feelings, and eventually get to a place of forgiveness, whether you're forgiving yourself, whether you're forgiving your child for not being the person that you thought they were supposed to be, whether your child has to forgive you for not supporting them the way that they thought that you should have. But forgiveness may be required, and both parties should be and be willing to be open to that in order to continue to evolve and grow that relationship. So that concludes my presentation. So I want to say thank you for listening, and I guess I'll open the floor if there are any questions or concerns. Okay, so I see that there's an anonymous attendee. How do I support my child when my partner is clearly not ready to accept them? I think that warrants a discussion between yourself and your partner, finding out the reasons why they don't accept them, what it will take potentially. I would recommend possibly therapy for your partner to get to the root of why they're not willing to accept that child. And then having those ongoing discussions. Again, it's not always easy to adapt changes in any relationship regardless, but you also need to let your partner know that it is important to support your child. And I would quote stats, because again, LGBTQ plus youth do have higher rates of suicide. So when you are having an environment outside that is toxic and detrimental to their mental well-being, and they're also coming home and experiencing the same thing, that is not going to have the best recipe for the child that you want to grow and be healthy and a great member of society. So I think getting to the root of your partner's issues and letting them know, I guess, overall that their feelings are valid. However, their issue with not accepting is their issue, and that's not going to change who your child is. Overall, your child's still the same child. They just are a little different. And just finding that common ground, and just being open to dialogue and those discussions, and encouraging them to use the appropriate pronouns, and just encouraging and instilling the respect in the home. And if it gets to the point where it's so toxic that they're not able to get along, then that's a decision that you have to make as to how you're going to navigate going forward, because that's not a situation that anyone should be living in.
Yeah, I think that's really great, Andre. I think I would also add on to that. It's just making sure that in addition to having these conversations one-on-one with partner, you're also having these conversations one-on-one with your child, letting them know, even though we don't have all the answers right now, even though maybe we're not all the way understanding right now, we are still here for you. We're trying, we're listening. And that's the best thing you can do, is remain open to listening, keep that communication, and no matter what, let your child know that even if you don't understand, what you do is love them, and what you can do is listen to them, and you can be a safer space for them, even if your partner is not ready yet, which will also require you to do a little bit of internal digging to see where you are with that and how you can best protect your child.
Love it. Thank you, Chloe. Is there another one in there? My child is a youth engaging in unsafe behavior and drug use. Any suggestions on how I should support them? I would look out into like community outreach and seeing what is available for that child in terms of treatment for the drug use, in terms of unsafe behavior. I'm assuming you mean sexually potentially, and if it is, I would let them speak with a counselor and a doctor to explain the risks for them, and then look into possibly what they can do to be safer, including condoms, use of PrEP, different things like that. So just advising them of all their options and making sure they're aware of everything that's available to them in this day and age in order to combat that behavior, as well as looking into possible therapy. Because if they're engaging in unsafe behavior, that may be indicative of possible depression and different things like that. So finding the root cause as to why they're engaging in unsafe behavior. And I think that once you get to the root cause of why, it will likely eventually treat them going through that. But I think the first steps will be looking into therapy, speaking with doctors to figure out what their options are in terms of protecting themselves while they navigate that. And then also looking into supports to get help in regards to the drug use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from a harm reduction standpoint, we understand that a lot of addiction and a lot of drug use comes from the desire to regulate our nervous system. And sometimes people are engaging in drug use because they just want to feel okay, they want to feel centered, and that is where a lot of addiction stems from. So, as Andre was saying, sometimes there are underlying issues that might make that an offer, might make your child vulnerable to engaging in what could be potentially unsafe or risky drug use or unsafe and risky behavior. So I think it all starts from a place of openness and understanding. It's important if you suspect or if you know your child is engaging in drug use that they know that they are able to talk to you. And if that is not an option, then you can at least introduce them to some professionals, like Andre was saying, and as well as really understand that not everybody that engages in drug use is doing it for reasons just to be risky. A lot of the times, as we were saying, there are some underlying reasons, and perhaps it's a phase, perhaps it's just something is happening. It's very, very hard to be a teenager right now. It's very hard to be a youth right now. And so offering as much grace as you can while also being proactive in what it is that can get them some help and also making sure to listen as much as possible are ways to really get ahead of that.
I think that's all the questions for now.
I had one question, Andre. And first, thank you so much for your presentation. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I started formulating a question around like anxiety related to just feelings that came up around safety for kids, because I know for a lot of parents, that's the immediate thing where their only exposure of like queerness is all the harms that the world can cause, right? And they don't see the joy and the thriving pieces. And so there's an immediate anxiety. But your response to that really answered that question around just like those being a valid feeling and so on. But the question I have is around pronouns. And I know that you talked about, respecting the pronouns of kids. But I was wondering if you could speak a little more to for those kids who know that something doesn't quite fit in terms of the pronouns that are being, thrown at them, but not have the language or ability to kind of like explain that. How can parents help them navigate that journey?
I think it's just it goes back to just listening to that child, because again, I listed 4. Apparently there's hundreds of different pronouns, so it's very important to just ask the child, and they may not be able to have all the language that comes with what they want to be called, but it's good to just ask them where they're at now, because as we've seen when it comes to celebrities and culture overall, there's been celebrities that have come out as non-binary and then changed back to she and her pronouns. So It just depends on where the child's at. They may not always have all the language, but they will tell you where they're at, and just listen and be willing to expand or change as those as a self-discovery progresses, and they discover more of who they are.
Thank you. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I guess we can go to Chloe's presentation. Super excited. I'm excited for both of these presentations, but Chloe, the stage is yours. Do you have share abilities, Chloe?
Yeah,
Yes.
I
Okay.
believe I do. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. Amazing. So thank you so much, Chris, for helping facilitate, and Andre for opening up the floor. A lot of the conversations that I'm hoping to have are very much connected to some of the foundational knowledge that we just earned from Andre. So thank you so much. So today we're going to be getting into families supporting queer and trans youth and what that can look like as a practice. So I want to invite everybody to just get comfortable in this space as we, I hope, already are. We have water, we're in a comfy space. We will be needing something to write with and write on because we have a little bit of a journaling exercise later on. And lastly, the really biggest thing that I would be asking from folks is just your presence and your willingness to listen and be open. And as you already have been asking questions, and I just want everyone to know, even if you haven't have it all figured out, even if you're still in a state of confusion or not achieving a lot of clarity within this topic of supporting your queer and trans child, the fact that you're actually here is monumental, and it's a huge first step. And I just want to give a lot of gratitude for the parents and the families and the loved ones that are making this choice to be open and to learn and to support the young ones in our lives. They're our future. And yeah, so really, really happy about that. So here's a little bit of our time together today. So we'll have a little bit of a check-in, and then we're going to talk about biases, specifically internal and external biases and how that can play out for us. We have a little bit of Black History, Queer and Trans edition, since it is Black Histories and Futures Month. We're going to talk about rejection, oppression, and mental health when it comes to youth, and we'll have a reflection activity and then have a little bit of boundary setting. So if at any point anyone would like me to repeat anything or have any questions, you're free to plug them in the chat. Otherwise, as we just did, there will also be a designated portion at the end for questions. So I'd like to start us off, as I usually do, with a gratitude check-in. Again, saying so much thanks for everyone to be here and having yourself in this space, for giving ourselves thanks, giving utmost thanks to our ancient ancestors that support us as we thrive and live on this earth, and of course our Indigenous kin as well, giving so much thanks to them. So I want us to check in with ourselves on two things before we get started. The first is your intention. What is it that brings you to this space today? If you are a part of the queer or trans community yourself, if you are supporting or learning how to support someone who's a part of the queer and trans community, just naming that intention to yourself, whether you're here to learn, whether you're here to listen. And number two, checking in on your impressions and considering the word support. And when you think of what it means to support someone, really asking yourself what that can look like as a practice. And I hope that we can have a bit more clarity on what the practice of support can look like after our time together today. So let's first go ahead and chat about biases, both conscious and unconscious. So a bias can be defined as a preconceived personal judgment or a preference towards something or someone that is usually informed by our personal feelings rather than backed by a fact. So because of this, biases are at times harmful because they can also be backed by prejudices. And if that's the case, this will be therefore affecting personal, professional, and certainly political areas of life. So even if you have an internal bias, it always will find its way out externally into how you interact and how you treat other people. So an unconscious bias is usually bias that comes from outside of a person's conscious awareness, which means it's not usually their own thought. It's not really something that they were born thinking or a deep rooted belief that they have. It's usually something that they've seen over and over and therefore got enforced as normal, such as a stereotype or a prejudice that was very commonly said in the family home or in their peer circles. So in this way, it is very covert because an unconscious bias can sometimes just seem like a preference. It can sometimes be something that we don't even think we have to give that much thought to. Maybe we just think that that's just the way things are. The thing about unconscious biases is that they can be very, very covert and sneaky, and even sometimes incompatible with the person's own values. So, for example, if there is a person that really stands against hate, yet they have unconscious biases towards a certain community, that might seem conflicting because outwardly they're not a hateful person, they're not trying to be hateful. However, they hold on to a bias that can cause harm to folks. And so in that way, our biases can sort of lurk under the surface of our true intentions. So an unconscious bias can be buried within someone's normalized attitudes and behaviors, which is why it can be really challenging sometimes to call someone out if you're noticing they are saying or doing something that could be problematic, because if it's deep-seated enough, they might not even understand it to be an issue. So let's swing to the other side of conscious biases. These ones present themselves a little bit different because a conscious bias is a bias that you are very much aware of. You're usually very declarative, which means you're very comfortable and okay with saying it out loud. And it can even sometimes be violent or extreme. A conscious bias is usually expressed through some kind of negative behavior and can go as far as harassment or start off as something as inclusion. So as we were saying before, one of the key differences between an unconscious and a conscious bias is that a conscious bias operates within the person's awareness, and it consistently helps them inform their decision-making process, and it consistently helps them justify their behavior. So as we can see, both of these ways to hold on to a bias can have potentially dangerous cause and effect. However, it's important that we understand the fact that just because we have a bias does not automatically make us horrible people, because the truth is that everybody has conscious and unconscious biases. And not every bias is unfounded, and not every bias means that we are coming from a place of hate. It could just mean that we're coming from a place of a lack of knowledge, a lack of experience, and that's okay too. What's most important is that we remain open to correction, because that's how we're able to snag those unconscious biases that we might just mistake for everyday behavior. All right, so moving on to Black History, Queer and Gender Diverse Edition. I love adding this part into presentations because I think as Black folks, especially, we sometimes work against and sometimes even hear the stereotype that queerness is like a white thing, or being queer is not of the Black community. And excuse me, because, you know, in our family, no one's queer. Therefore, you have to be the only one. So I don't know where you're getting this from. And so, as we know within the queer community, you don't have to be out to be queer. So therefore, there are many people in all of our lineages that may very well have identified within the LGBTQ plus community, but just were never in a safe enough social setting to admit that to anyone else, even themselves. That, however, still doesn't erase their queerness. Not only that, but Black history is queer history. They are very much connected. Queer people have always existed in literally every culture, literally every race, and we predate colonial interference. Prior to first contact, as we're about to see, there were communities all across the African diaspora that celebrated gender diversity. And it wasn't until we were met with the forced conversion to these different religions that a lot of the mistruths and stigmas officially started. So let's get into it. We have first the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So historically, they were a group called Bengala people, and they held what is called animist spiritual belief, which is the belief that everything has a soul. It doesn't have to be a living thing, it doesn't have to be a living being. So the nature, the flowers, the rocks, everything has a soul, and therefore everything must be respected. So these beliefs and these Bengali people predated centuries, hundreds and hundreds of years before colonialism. Within their cultures, they had shamans who would dress in traditional women's clothing, and they were key parts of society. So they would help do things like solve crimes, they would protect communities, and they were very respected and very active. In Uganda, there were the Ankole people who, again, thrived well before colonialism. Within the Ankole culture, people would elect a woman to dress in what was traditional men's clothing, and this was seen as a very sacred oracle and a very sacred symbolism to their god. In Kenya and Tanzania, the Mashoga was a Swahili term to describe a range of identities that were on the gender continuum. So as opposed to that hard binary of she and the he's or the women and the man, they already had a language, which is huge because right now in English, we're still discovering these languages and unearthing these languages. So think about how advanced we must have been and how accepted as a culture we must have been to have already had this in the language, predating colonialism, which again described a range of identities on the gender continuum. This term Mashoga was also sometimes used to describe gay men. The population consisted of people who were assigned male at birth, who would wear traditional clothing for both men and women as they saw fit, and they would often assume female gender roles in their societies. The Mashoga people were very respected, very important, and were actually crucial in wedding ceremonies. Finally, I have here Madagascar. So in Madagascar, the people were referred to as the Sakalava people, and they would raise some little boys as women depending on how they were responding to their social environment and what they were interested in at a young age. So they encouraged gender fluidity rather than shamed it. These people were called the Sakrasa, and they would wear silver in their long hair. They would train their voices to speak at a certain pitches and certain cadences. And the society that they lived in not only supported their transition, but they believed that it was very natural for these people to live this lifestyle and to live this way. These people were actually revered as supernatural. Their communities loved them, and they were believed to have had supernatural protection against harm. Now, these are only 4 examples from 4 different places within the African diaspora. And if you're curious, this map I actually sourced from PBS. So if you wanted to look into for future Black and gender diverse history, they have a whole map that shows you all across the continent how there are all these groups of people, all these societies that lived for centuries, for thousands of years, some of them, celebrating, understanding, and making room for queerness and gender diversity. And so I think this is a particularly powerful piece because I wanted to understand that queer people are not new. It's not something that's just happening now. What is happening now is that there's more of a safety, there are more conversations, there are more social institutions built to protect. And let's be real, there's still not a lot and not enough of these social institutions built. However, they're existing more than they did before, which is why people are feeling more comfortable to have these conversations, and which is why events that we're attending right now are even a possibility to happen. And so just remembering the fact that we have always been here, we always will be here. And although colonization and white supremacy tried its absolute hardest to destroy the history of Black, queer, and trans people, it did not work. So that's something to celebrate. On that note, I want to chat a little bit about that link between colonialism and queerphobia, because it's real. So with colonization came what we know as the scramble for Africa, which is when the colonizing forces basically divided up Africa like a pie and they took what they wanted, and thus began so much hardship for so many lineages within the diaspora. And this was all done from greed. This was all done from wanting to loot, wanting to steal the natural resources that we have. And so with this phenomenon of the scramble for Africa came the normalization of things like European missionaries visiting unannounced and visiting unwanted, as well as violent conversion efforts that really attempted to erase African spirituality, erase African history, and assimilate specifically to Catholicism and Christianity in some cases. So with this erasure came a complete intolerance of gender and sexual diversity, because what they needed were tools of control and oppression. And that was one of them. And so the forcing of the gender binary was something that was done very deliberately by colonial forces. Queerphobia, therefore, and colonialism are linked to religious extremism, and they always have been. So I want to take this time to clarify the fact that our faith is our own to define, and there's nobody that can take that away from us. We all have the right to exist comfortably in our faith. However, what we need to be crucially examining is the way in which we sometimes might see or sometimes might have been guilty of using our religion or using our faith as means to justify poor treatment for folks. So we need to try to remember as much as we can that at the core of basically every single religion, regardless of the belief, the core of that is love for our fellow humans. And the way that we embody that and the way that we stay grounded in our faith is first getting rid of our human egos that say that you have to be like me and you have to look like me in order for me to respect you, and really embodying the nature of our faith, which is grace. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, chatting more about rejection, oppression, and youth mental health. So rejection is something that queer and trans youth unfortunately get familiar with very early on in life. And it's usually the case that their first experiences of rejection happen in the home. So when children and youth feel rejected by their families, they then begin to suppress the behavior that they know their family doesn't like. So even if this is natural behavior for them, like the way they speak, the things that they like to do, the things that they like to dress, they are going to develop a hyper awareness of these things, which can really lead to some psychological consequences, to some identity crises where you think, well, if this is me and this is how I was made and this is how I am and this is unacceptable to the people that are supposed to love me the most, then I therefore must not be deserving, which, as Andre was pointing out before, can be a very, very dangerous place for children and youth to go, because then their lives do not feel worth or valued. So this births self-oppression, which is essentially a mini model or a microcosm of the societal oppression that queer people might face outside of the home. What's more upsetting is that when this exists inside of the home, it's in a highly concentrated personal form that feels very deliberate and very attaching to one or deliberate amount of people, which can feel like the whole world's against you sometimes. So under heavy self-shaming and self-oppression, mental health will become compromised. That is the natural course of events. So if you're noticing your child starting to repress themselves or starting to feel like they are not good enough in any way, or that their natural ways of being are not acceptable, please do your best to reinforce the fact that they are worthy and that they are enough. So I have a reflection activity as promised for everybody. So if you want to take a moment to grab a journal, or if you have something to write with or write on, if you're on a device, whatever it is the most accessible for you. I want us to consider something that you vividly remember being punished for or scolded against as a child. And we're going to reflect, what does our relationship to that specific behavior look like now? So let's have maybe like 3 minutes and just consider this. And then we can do an optional share. We don't have to do the share, but the floor will be open if folks want to share. Does that sound okay? All right, so let's take 3 minutes and consider that. All right, folks, just checking in on if we are finished, if we need 1 or 2 more minutes. For folks that are finished, the floor is open if you'd like to share. However, this is a reflection activity, so this could also be something that we're just reflecting on ourselves. And if there is anyone that wants to add any insights, then you're free to plug them in the chat, and we're happy to incorporate them into our discussion. So the reason why I asked this question is because when we are children, our parents, I think, are very hyper aware of the fact that it is their job to teach us what is right from wrong. What gets skewed is when your concept of right from wrong falls into problematic areas. And therefore, you sometimes end up scolding behavior that, in the grand scheme of things, maybe isn't that bad, or maybe isn't something that should be scolded. Like, I'm Caribbean, and old school Caribbeans would like punish children for writing with their left hand, for example, because that was their concept of right and wrong. And what that usually created is a very unhealthy, sometimes, relationship between the child and the behavior that they were trying to be deterred against. So if we swap out writing with your left hand with something like, I don't know, the way that we walk, or the way that we talk, or the things that we like to do, it usually swings to one side or the other. It's either we now have a very distant relationship from that behavior, it makes us uncomfortable, and this usually is the most indicative when we see other people happily doing this behavior, and we are triggered for some reason, or we feel upset that that person doesn't realize that they should be ashamed of that behavior. What other thing that happens is that we break free of that, and we realize that we are in charge of our own happiness, and we are in charge of our own freedom, and we get to have our own relationship, which might sometimes swing over even to overindulgence if we have been dissuaded from a particular thing. So I'm seeing someone in the chat said, I was always scolded for keeping the house clean. Now I get anxious when my mother visits, and I quickly rush to clean the house. Tale as old as time. I completely empathize with that. It's so true. And so I like that you realize that the catalyst to that was somebody coming and visiting. It's not that you are internalizing that to say that I am, unclean or unhealthy, or, a disgusting person because my house isn't perfectly spick and span. That we're recognizing that perhaps that pressure came from outside of ourselves. And even if we're still dealing with that pressure, it's still a big deal to be able to follow the thread and see where that came from. So I appreciate everyone that took the time. Yeah, Andre, did you want to share?
Yeah, so I thought of two things. So one thing personally, and I saw a video on social media recently where this white lady was with her baby, and her baby spilled milk all over the counter. And most parents' reaction would have been to yell or be like, why'd you do that? And she's like, oh, that's okay. And we all, like, a lot of people, especially from the Caribbean community, were triggered.
Yeah,
we're like, oh my gosh. like imagine how that child's going to navigate the world, not being afraid to make mistakes and being on wheels because they're not getting scolded for doing things that kids naturally do, like dropping something or spilling something. And then personally, I thought of as a child, how my grandmother used to scold us for taking seconds because it was like, I made food for the week and you guys are eating too much and doing too much. And it's like, as an adult, I find that I indulge in excess because I was used to having everything regimented in terms of like portion control or smaller portions. So as an adult, I feel like now I have the freedom, but then it causes me to indulge a little too much at times because I was used to going without or not having all my needs or what I felt at the time was my nutritional needs met. That as an adult, now that I can pay for things and do things on my own, I do that a little more than I should because of those things that I encountered in my childhood.
Thank you so much for both of those examples, Andre. I know the exact video that you're talking about with the gentle parenting lady.
Yeah. It made me check myself as a parent.
Outrage.
I react that way too, like not always to yell, but like I get annoyed. And it made me it forced me to check myself, like my own biases and the way I react based on my experiences. So it made me be like, oh my God, I need to check that as a parent.
And that's such a powerful thing to do. Like, I think that with parents, when you're able to course correct like that, when we're
Hmm.
able to see, like, oh, okay, maybe that's not the best approach. Let me pivot over here. Like,
Yeah.
that's literally what we're talking about when we say like
Hmm.
generational changes. Like, that's literally what that is. It's you're learning in real time and you're learning with your children so that there's certain things that don't get passed down in terms of anxieties or
Yep.
fears. So it's a very powerful thing.
Yep.
Totally. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I see your note here, Chris. Sounds good. Perfect. Well, yeah, that was really, really special. Thank you all for considering that one. It's just that one's a real one, right? It brings you back. You're like, oh, okay. I like to always point out the fact that society puts all of this, I think, respect, and there's a lot of focus on adulthood is like the pinnacle. Like that's when you deserve all the respect. That's when you deserve all these things. But as adults, we're just like grown ass children. Had there not been gravity and all these situational things happening that allow the body to stretch and expand and age and grow, we'd look the same. It's literally just time. The time is what separates us from our childhood to our adulthood. And within that time is all the lessons that you learn. And so we're really not that different from children in general, let alone the person we were as children. What we have now are new skills. So let's move on to what I like to call the youth structure of needs, which I believe if we can encapsulate how it is that we can support children, but especially children and youth who are part of queer and trans communities, this is, I think, a great place to start. So at the very top of that structure is two-way vulnerability. And what I mean by that is vulnerability, of course, from the child, because they are the vulnerable person in this relationship as a person that is dependent on the parent, but vulnerability also from the parent. Now, this is where it gets complicated because a lot of us were raised by people who were fighting for their life. They were just trying to make ends meet. They were in a society that was actively hostile, actively working against them, and they were just trying to not get their children taken away, and they were just trying to live a life that kept their head above water. And that does not create an environment for you to safely be vulnerable. So it's very, very hard to come home and offer that to your children, especially when vulnerability is not really placed highly on the valuable side of things when you're an adult. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to know exactly what to do, especially when you're a parent. You're supposed to have your shit together and you're supposed to be the voice of reason at all times. And this creates this kind of mask of seriousness and this mask of I have it all together that a lot of us remember our parents and caretakers wearing as we grow older. We might have thought things like, why can't they just relax and have fun? Why do you never smile? Why are you always so stressed out? Why can't you just be a little, why can't we go like this together? And that's because that wasn't possible for them. And so what I'm proposing now is making this a possibility, having that two-way vulnerability so that your child can see that to be vulnerable does not mean that you are only susceptible to harm. It is an indication that you're feeling safe enough to say, I need help. I don't know what I'm doing. And that in itself is challenging, especially when you have smaller children. And of course, you can't always be like, "Do you want to know what? I'm so sorry, you're gonna have to figure dinner out tonight." I'm what? You know what I mean? That's not usually the case, especially when you have smaller kids, or especially when you're a new parent. So it's not necessarily about relying on your child to prop up your vulnerability, but more so be a model for them and understanding that as a parent or as a caretaker, or even as someone that has a consistent relationship with a child, you are literally teaching them how to be a human. And so if they're growing up seeing that you can't make mistakes, you can't feel like you need support, then that's gonna create an extra layer for them to work through when they grow up and they find out the real tea, which is that grown-ups don't really know what we're doing all of the time. right? And so that vulnerability needs to be established early on so that they can grow that practice of asking for help and saying, do you want to know what? I don't know the answer to that. And so that they can actually clear the pathway so that when it is appropriate, when they are older, they can create a friendship with you when that is a necessary part of your relationship as you kind of move out of that caretaker role as your children become adults or as they become young adults. So second on the structure of needs is access to autonomy. So this is another one. So parents, of course, know that from the time you're raising a newborn, their needs are tied to yours. Anything that they actually need to have, you need to provide it for them. And that puts parents in a situation where they usually have to foresee a need. They have to say, okay, you're fine now, but in 2 hours, you're going to get hungry, you're going to need a nap. And it puts them in this position where your brain is always split into two, what you're doing and what you're setting up for your kids, how your day's going, how your kid's day needs to go. And so what this does is it allows your child, of course, to feel safe and taken care of. They have a structure, they have a routine. But what it also does is that as your child gets older, sometimes parents struggle to pull back a little bit. And sometimes parents struggle to understand that as your children age and they have more access to their brains, they have more access to their own personalities, they are therefore going to need access to their own autonomy. And this starts happening in very early on in little ways, such as when they start rejecting their binky, or they don't want to do certain things or wear certain things, or, they don't want to hold mommy or daddy's hand anymore. And they have all these like little things that seem so important to them and that they're willing to have a full tantrum or meltdown over. And that's usually indicative of the need for them to understand themselves as individuals. Babies actually don't understand until a certain point in their development that they are existing as separate from their parents. They believe that they are connected because for a long time they were. Not only were their needs connected, but in some cases their bodies were also connected. And so this access to autonomy is a learning curve, first for the parents and then for the child. Next is respect over fear. Now, a huge thing in Black households, especially, is respect. And I actually do not knock that. I think, if anything, that was certainly one thing that our ancestors got right. However, again, it's kind of what I was saying earlier with that whole right versus wrong mentality. The respect thing is necessary, but you also need to examine what it is, that you mean by respect. Because in cultures that I'm coming from, respect was very much synonymous to subservience. To respect my parent is to do absolutely everything they say, no questions, no asking, completely disregarding any of my own boundaries. And that created a lot of fear of what would happen if I didn't do what they said, fear that maybe they wouldn't, if you don't listen to me, this is going to happen to you and that's going to happen to you. And a lot of the time, that is what rules the household. But your child can respect you or your child can fear you. They cannot healthily do both. And so instilling respect needs to then actually connect back to that two-way vulnerability, because respect is not something that you demand and then get right away. Respect is something that grows. Respect is a practice. Respect is a fundamental understanding that you deserve and I deserve. So how can we work together to make this a shared reality? Respect is not, I'm bigger than you, I'm older than you, I'm stronger than you, I'm smarter than you, and therefore you must respect me. Respect is, I am a human with my experiences, you are my loved one, and I'm here to help guide you. And in return, you're going to respect me, and I'm going to show you how you need to be respected as well. So that when you're outside of this home and when you're outside and you're interacting with people that aren't me and you're interacting with people that are not loved ones, you can understand when you were being disrespected and when it is you need to stand up for yourself. Lastly, the foundational structure, the foundational element, I believe, in the youth structure of needs, at the base of everything is being seen and being protected, especially for queer and trans children. Being seen it's very complicated because obviously our parents can see us, they're around us, or our families can see us and they're around us. But being seen is so much more than sharing space with somebody. It's somebody being curious and interested in your life. It's somebody allowing you to be the expert on your own experience and asking you questions and trying to understand you and saying, do you want to know what? I don't understand, but I do love you. So I'm going to try to listen to you. And being seen means that you can actually exist in the world in the ways that make sense to you without having to consistently explain yourself over and over, or even worse, have to consistently defend yourself against harm just for being who you are. And of course, being protected is the utmost important foundational element of the youth structure of needs. All children deserve protection, and it's challenging because, of course, as parents or as family members, that's the number one thing you want to do is protect your child. And so it's hard to think that sometimes that protection can apply to you as well, but it applies to everybody. And protection becomes necessary when harm is introduced at any level. And so this can look like defending your child against family members or other grown-ups, or sometimes even other children if that's what's happening. And also allowing yourself to apologize if you said something that hurt your child, or if your child is expressing any pain or any harm from any kind of interaction. Showing them that it's okay to apologize is what allows them to understand that they are deserving an apology. And they're also allowing themselves to understand that to give an apology is not to take anything away from them. It's to actually give a gift to your loved one. So lastly, before we close out, I just want to end with some boundary setting for youth in terms of what this can actually look like in terms of needs, asks, and things that they might actually say. So when a child needs, in this section of the meeting, this might look like they need to cry, they might need to get upset, they might need to throw tantrums, they may need to throw their shoes. Toddlers love doing that one. They might need to act a mess sometimes without fear of being punished because they are just learning these things. They are experiencing, if your toddler is having a temper tantrum, consider the fact that this is probably one of the first times they've ever felt this in their life. You know, there's a lot of things happening throughout the developmental stages of a child's life. There's hormones happening, there's their inner world, there's their outer world. There's a lot of things that they're learning for the first time, and they need to be able to have a safe outlet to get upset without fear of being punished. Now, this doesn't mean that your child can be disrespectful or, you know, run your house amok and you're not going to do anything. It just means that you're able to allow them to have their moments and then talk to them about it afterwards. And maybe in that talk, you're explaining what was and what was not acceptable, but they knew in that moment that if they were feeling a lot of big emotions, that they have the space to get it out. Sometimes they might need to spend more time with friends as they get older. Sometimes they might need more patience or reassurance. And I know it's testing. I know, I know it can be challenging, but it's the name of the game and it's par for the course for being around children as they grow up. And these are the things that they're going to understand as they grow up and be able to offer it to themselves and to offer it to others. So it will always be worth it. Next, boundary setting for youth can look like them asking to maybe stay home alone, or maybe they have a sudden interest in being by themselves, or maybe they don't want to hang out with the family as much. This one's really hard because it hurts feelings, right? Parents might not understand it. Parents might get sad. Parents might think, you know, they're never going to want to hang out with me again. But they're just figuring out their individuality. And this goes back to them needing to flex their autonomy sometimes. They need to know that they're an individual that can make choices even at a micro level. Because when you're a child and when you're a teenager, when you're a youth, you don't have that many things that you're responsible for usually. So therefore, you don't have a lot of wiggle room to do whatever you want. So they need to experience that in safe microwaves before they're thrown out into the world and suddenly have all the responsibility for all of their choices. Next, they might ask to try or do new things that they've never done before, all a part of that exploration process. This might translate to them saying no. This is a hard one. You know, I feel like there's like the baby and toddler parents who are like, oh yeah, I get no 17 times a day, of course. And then there's the parents that are maybe raising children that are older and their no's hit a little bit different. And so, regardless of the circumstance, it's again allowing this. It's allowing them to say no. First of all, their no doesn't mean that that's how things are going to go. Sometimes their no, for safety or other reasons, needs to be overruled. However, they need to be able to say it. It's important for them to be able to say it, even if they don't get what they want. They might be starting to say things like, I don't like this. I don't want to hug that person. I don't want to go to grandma's house. They might even say things like, you're not listening to me, or I changed my mind. So you're not listening to me, I think, is a really big indicator. And I think that, especially in times of high conflict, if you're feeling frustrated, your instinct might be to kind of like, maybe pop back at them, maybe explode, maybe, what do you mean I'm not listening? But whenever a child, whenever a youth is expressing that, it's usually something deeper and it's usually something outside of the current conversation you're having. So even if it can't be addressed in that moment, make a note to yourself to go back in a calmer state of mind and ask them what it is they're talking about. Give them that opportunity, because that's them presenting an opportunity to share with you, and allow them to have that moment without punishing them. And also, lastly, allowing them to change their mind. I think this is something even adults struggle with. The concept that we can change our mind, we can go back and forth, and that doesn't make us less than, it doesn't make us unserious, it doesn't make us a flip-flopper. It just means that we're being true to ourselves and we're realizing that internal changes are happening, and sometimes that results in some change. Whew. All right, so I know we went through a lot just now, but we are at the end of our time together. The floor is officially open for any questions or checkouts. I just wanted to thank everyone for your time again. This was a really beautiful conversation. If you'd like to keep in touch, I have my handle as well as my email address and website up on the screen. And yeah, floor is open for questions, but I will pass it over to Chris for now to wrap us up.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chloe. I think I really appreciated how much you worked in the fact that as adults, we're just like big children, and that there's so much of this social pressure to know everything and be the ones that's like holding things down and taking the reins, when realistically we don't always have it figured out.
We don't have the answers. We don't know everything. I love that. That
Not at all.
resonated.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I am looking out for questions. You know, I
Yeah.
will also say, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say there's a lot of info, so take your time percolating if you're typing your questions. It's all good.
Well, I was gonna also say that I really appreciated you grounding the conversation in like history, especially
Mhm.
touching on the piece that, and I hear this all the time where it's like, oh, the world is changing, and oh, look at all this new
Good old
wrinkle,
days.
right? And it's like, actually, no.
No, we've always been here,
Yeah,
Surprise! Yeah.
right? I
yeah,
loved it. Very informative.
yeah.
Thank you
Um,
both so much.
yeah. Okay, well, if there are no questions, I will say once again, thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Andre, for, coming in and, passing on such amazing knowledge, sharing your insights, and just guiding us through just how to better support the lives of 2SLGBTQIA plus youth. It's so important, especially as both of you have highlighted that and I think you actually said, Andre, it's a life and death.
Literally.
That's the difference, right? Because we want to ensure that our youth continue to experience belonging and
Mhm.
feel loved, and feel like they have the opportunity to be whoever, whatever they want, and be successful in that reality. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you. What a beautiful evening.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining and listening, and for the amazing questions. I see a comment here. I loved every second You're both phenomenal speakers, and I truly hope we can continue working together.
I
And
want to also.
thank you.
Thank you
So,
guys.
Okay, have a wonderful rest of your evenings.
You
Thank
too.
you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you,
Alright.
Chloe. Thank you, Chris. Thank
Bye.
you.
thank you,
Nicole.
Andre. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
night.
Take care.